The phone rang at 2:17 a.m., shattering the quiet of the Holloway home like a hammer through glass. Marcus Holloway jolted upright in bed, heart hammering, and grabbed the receiver. A cold, clipped voice on the other end delivered the blow. "This is Lauren Castile, president of Willow Creek HOA. You have 48 hours to remove the fence you illegally erected along the rear property line, or we will file for lien foreclosure on your home." Marcus sat frozen in the dark, the words sinking in like ice water. His wife, Sarah, stirred beside him. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't answer right away. He couldn't. The fence in question had stood exactly where it was for 27 years, built by his grandfather the summer Marcus turned 12. It marked the true boundary of the family's corner lot on Maple Ridge Lane, a quiet cul-de-sac in suburban Colorado where the Holloways had lived for 3 generations. Marcus was 42, a structural engineer who fixed bridges and overpasses for the state. He believed in rules, in doing things right, in the quiet sanctity of a man's home. But this was different. This wasn't a rule. This was theft disguised as enforcement. By morning, the first official notice was taped to his front door in a bright red sleeve. Lauren Castile's signature dominated the bottom like a royal decree. She was a sharp-featured woman in her late 40s with perfectly highlighted hair and a wardrobe that screamed country club authority. She had risen to HOA President 2 years earlier on a platform of restoring neighborhood standards, and she ruled with fines, security cameras, and an inner circle of loyal board members who echoed her every command. Marcus stood on his porch in the cool dawn light, the same blue hour his grandfather used to love, watching mist rise from the low retention pond at the back of the neighborhood. The land remembered things people forgot. That was what his grandfather had always said while walking the property lines with a worn metal tape measure and a spiral notebook. He had documented every fence post, every easement, every subtle shift in the soil where underground springs once ran before the subdivision was built. Marcus pulled out the old green notebook from the drawer in his study. Pages filled with his grandfather's neat handwriting chronicled rainfall patterns, drainage issues, and the exact location of the original survey pins from 1978. The current HOA plat map, which Lauren insisted was gospel, showed the rear boundary cutting 12 feet into Marcus's backyard. It was wrong. He knew it the way he knew the creek in the third stair. That afternoon, Lauren arrived in a white SUV with 2 board members in tow. She stood at the edge of Marcus's lawn in expensive sandals, arms crossed. "The covenants are clear, Mr. Holloway. Non-compliant structures must be removed. We've already sent notices to 3 other homes, but yours is the most egregious." Marcus felt a cold anger settle in his chest. "This fence has been here longer than your covenants. My grandfather built it on the original line." Lauren's smile was thin and pitying. "With all due respect, nostalgia doesn't override governing documents. Remove it, or we escalate." She turned on her heel, her assistants trailing like obedient shadows. Marcus watched them drive away, the weight of threat pressing on him. He had a mortgage, 2 kids in school, and a wife who was already terrified of losing their home. Fear twisted in his gut, but beneath it burned something harder: resolve. He opened the green notebook again and began writing, just as his grandfather had done for 53 years. The neighborhood was quiet now, but Marcus could feel it watching. The valley, the street, the yards, the hidden drainage beneath the manicured lawns remembered. And for the first time in years, someone was listening. Marcus spent the next week buried in paperwork, the green spiral notebook open on the kitchen table like a sacred text. Sarah watched him with worried eyes as he cross-referenced old county survey records with the HOA's revised plat maps. The discrepancy was clear. The 1978 original survey pins placed the boundary exactly where his grandfather's fence stood. The HOA's version, filed in 2019 under Lauren Castile's first year as president, had quietly shifted the line inward by 12 feet. It was a land grab disguised as administrative correction. One evening, as golden light slanted through the living room windows, Marcus stood at the rear fence line. The air smelled of cut grass and distant rain. He knelt, fingers brushing the weathered wood his grandfather had nailed into place decades ago. A soft wind rustled the leaves overhead, carrying the faint sound of children playing 3 houses down. This was more than wood and wire. This was legacy. The thought tightened his throat with a mix of love and rising fear. If they took this, what else would they claim next? The escalation came swiftly. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived demanding $2,500 in fines for ongoing violation and threatening immediate lien placement. Lauren's signature was bold and final. That same afternoon, Marcus's truck was ticketed for parking 2 inches over the painted line in his own driveway. The neighborhood security camera, newly installed and pointed directly at his property, captured everything. He decided to knock on doors. Mrs. Eleanor Ramirez, a kind widow who had lived across the street for 30 years, invited him in for coffee. "I've seen what she's doing," Eleanor whispered, her hands trembling around her mug. "Lauren changed the covenants last year without a proper vote. My roses were cited too, but I'm too old to fight." Her words gave him hope until he noticed the HOA board meeting minutes on her kitchen counter, freshly printed. The twist hit Marcus like a punch to the gut 2 nights later. He was reviewing old emails when a notification popped up. A local news forum post about Willow Creek HOA. Someone had anonymously shared documents showing the association had been sued 3 years earlier by a former resident for similar boundary manipulations. The case was settled quietly with an NDA. The plaintiff? None other than Eleanor Ramirez's son, who had moved away after losing his backyard shed. Marcus sat back, stunned. The friendly neighbor who had offered sympathy was feeding information straight to Lauren. Betrayal burned hot in his chest. He closed the laptop and walked to the window, staring at Eleanor's lit porch. The street looked peaceful under the soft glow of lampposts, but the illusion was shattered. The neighborhood wasn't just watching. Some were actively working against him, undeterred. Marcus doubled down. He hired a licensed surveyor on his own dime. The man arrived at dawn the following Saturday, yellow equipment gleaming in the early light. As the surveyor drove stakes and took GPS readings, Lauren appeared at the curb in her white SUV, flanked by 2 board members. Her face was flushed with anger. "You have no right to conduct unauthorized surveys on common areas," she snapped, her voice carrying across the lawn. The surveyor, a burly man named Tom from Boulder, didn't flinch. "This is private property, ma'am. And these pins tell a different story than your maps." Lauren's eyes narrowed. She pulled out her phone and began recording. "This is harassment. The board will address this at the next meeting." As she stormed off, Marcus felt the weight of isolation pressing down. Sarah stood on the porch holding their youngest daughter's hand, her face pale. Fear flickered in her eyes, but Marcus met her gaze with quiet determination. Inside, his heart raced with both terror and defiance. That night, under the dim desk lamp, Marcus added another entry to the notebook. His handwriting mirrored his grandfather's, neat, deliberate. The land remembered, the buried truths, the shifted lines, the quiet manipulations. He wasn't alone in this fight, even if it felt that way. Somewhere in the quiet suburban valley, justice was waiting to be uncovered. But the cost was rising, and Lauren Castile showed no sign of backing down. The courtroom doors felt like the gates of judgment as Marcus Holloway stepped inside, his tie suddenly too tight around his neck. It was only a preliminary hearing, but the air was thick with dread. Lauren Castile sat across the aisle, flanked by her attorney and 2 board members, her posture regal, lips curved in a triumphant smirk. The judge's gavel had barely sounded before her lawyer unleashed the assault, a motion for summary judgment seeking immediate foreclosure on the Holloway home to enforce the lien. Marcus gripped the edge of the wooden bench, knuckles white. Inside, panic clawed at him. This wasn't just about offense anymore. Sarah sat beside him, eyes red from sleepless nights. Their 2 children left with a neighbor who now avoided eye contact. The HOA had escalated with ruthless precision, daily fines compounding to over $18,000, a freeze on their community amenities, and anonymous letters circulating through the neighborhood branding Marcus as a disruptive element, threatening property values. The betrayal cut deepest in the days leading up to the hearing. Eleanor Ramirez had publicly sided with Lauren at the last HOA meeting, tearfully claiming Marcus's survey disturbed the peace. Other neighbors followed, some out of fear, others swayed by Lauren's promises of stricter enforcement that would protect their investments. Marcus watched from his porch as familiar faces turned away, car doors slamming a little harder when they passed his house. The street that once felt like home now carried the silence of a battlefield. One cinematic afternoon, storm clouds gathered low over Maple Ridge Lane. Marcus stood alone at the rear fence line as heavy rain began to fall, soaking his shirt. Lightning flashed, illuminating the weathered posts his grandfather had driven deep into the earth. He knelt in the mud, fingers tracing the original survey pin, now confirmed by his expert. Rain streamed down his face, mixing with hot tears of fury and exhaustion. The land remembered. It had held firm through floods and droughts, just as his family had. But the system designed to protect it was being weaponized against him. Back in court, Lauren rose to speak, her voice smooth as polished marble. Mr. Holloway refuses to acknowledge duly recorded covenants. This is not about one fence. It's about the rule of law in our community. Her eyes met Marcus's with cold satisfaction. The judge, clearly sympathetic to the HOA's paperwork-heavy presentation, set a trial date but warned that continued violation could result in immediate enforcement. That night, the final blow landed. A process server knocked on the door at 9:47 p.m., delivering papers announcing a full foreclosure proceeding. Sarah broke down in the kitchen, clutching the green notebook to her chest. They're going to take our home. Marcus, everything your grandfather built. Marcus pulled her close, but inside, terror warred with a burning resolve. He had uncovered hidden board minutes revealing Lauren had personally profited from previous boundary adjustments through undisclosed consulting fees. He had video evidence of her directing workers to repaint lines under cover of darkness. Yet the system seemed rigged in her favor. As thunder rolled outside, Marcus stood at the window watching rain lash the street. Neighbors' lights flickered off one by one, leaving his house isolated in the downpour. The community that should have stood with him had turned its back. Everything he loved, his family's legacy, their future, their very roof, was hanging by a thread. Lauren Castile had pushed too far, but in this moment, it felt like she was winning. The valley remembered. But would anyone else listen before it was too late? The community meeting hall buzzed with uneasy tension under harsh fluorescent lights as Marcus Holloway stood at the podium, the green spiral notebook clutched in his hands like a shield. Rain from the previous night still glistened on the windows, mirroring the storm that had nearly broken him. Lauren Castile sat in the front row, flanked by her loyal board members, her face a mask of controlled fury. But cracks had begun to show. Anonymous tips had flooded the county recorder's office after Marcus quietly shared his evidence online through a neighborhood forum. Old residents started digging through their own attics, unearthing original deeds and surveys that contradicted the HOA's altered maps. Marcus's voice carried steady and clear, omniscient in its calm, despite the fear that still lingered in his chest. This isn't just my fence. It's about whether a handful of people can rewrite history for their own gain. He opened the notebook and read entries spanning decades, his grandfather's meticulous records of boundary markers, drainage patterns, and the original 1978 survey pins. Sarah sat in the third row, her eyes shining with pride and lingering tears. Their children watched from the back, sensing the gravity of the moment. The turning point came when Eleanor Ramirez rose slowly from her seat. The hall fell silent. "I was wrong," she said, her voice trembling but growing stronger. "Lauren asked me to watch Marcus's house. She promised it would protect our property values. But I've seen the old documents now. We've all been manipulated." Gasps rippled through the crowd. One by one, other neighbors stood, sharing stories of arbitrary fines, altered covenants, and quiet intimidation. A young father held up his phone, playing a video of Lauren's team repainting property lines at midnight. The evidence mounted like a rising tide. Lauren shot to her feet, her voice sharp. "This is ridiculous. These are baseless accusations." But her usual allies shifted uncomfortably. The county commissioner, present at the meeting, announced that an official investigation had been opened into the HOA's record-keeping practices. Documents revealed Lauren had personally benefited from consulting contracts tied to boundary resolutions in 3 previous cases. The room erupted. For the first time, Marcus saw real fear in Lauren's eyes as the power she had wielded so ruthlessly began to slip away. In the blue hour the following morning, Marcus stood on his porch with Sarah and the children. Mist rose gently from the retention pond at the back of the neighborhood, just as his grandfather had described. The weathered fence still stood strong, a testament to truth over manipulation. The land remembered, and now the community did too. A small group of neighbors gathered at the curb, offering tools and helping hands to reinforce the original boundary markers. The solidarity felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Weeks later, the HOA board voted to remove Lauren as president. A new election brought in fairer leadership, and the covenants were revised with community input. The Holloways received compensation for their legal fees and the distress caused. Marcus didn't gloat. He simply added one final entry to the green notebook. The valley remembers. And sometimes, when people listen, justice finds its way home. As they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in soft oranges and pinks, Sarah leaned against him. "You did it," she whispered. Marcus smiled, feeling the weight lift. "We did it, together." If this story reached you tonight, remember that your home, your rights, your voice matter. Stand up when it's right. The land and your neighbors might just stand with you. Hit subscribe and share your own stories in the comments. Let's keep these valleys connected.